how a 15-acre plot of land in Arizona wasn't the family's promised land, but the final battleground in a decade-long financial and emotional Cold War. This is the story of Coyote Pass, a desolate patch of dirt that exposed the rot at the core of the Brown family's carefully constructed image. What was presented to the world as a polygamous dream of unity and shared futures was, in reality, a meticulously crafted illusion, a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and devastating financial betrayal. We're about to unravel the Coyote Pass conspiracy, a saga of greed and control that ultimately tore a family apart, leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered dreams in its wake. This is a story you won't want to miss. So if you're ready for the shocking truth, hit that like button, subscribe to COCO Gossip, and ring the notification bell because we're just getting started. The story begins, as it so often does with the Browns, with a grand televised spectacle. The year is 2018, and the family is once again on the move, leaving behind their four-home cul-de-sac in Las Vegas for the promise of a new life in Flagstaff, Arizona. The reason for the abrupt relocation remains murky, a concoction of excuses about a more welcoming community and a desire for a change of scenery. But what is crystal clear is the dream being sold to the public, Coyote Pass. This sprawling 14-acre property, purchased for a hefty $820,000, was to be their forever home, the culmination of their polygamous journey. The narrative, carefully curated for the cameras, was one of unwavering unity. Kody Brown, the patriarch, stood at the center of it all, a modern-day Brigham Young with a man bun, painting a picture of a harmonious future. He spoke of building one giant communal home, a testament to their unbreakable bond, or, failing that, 4 individual houses, nestled together on the picturesque landscape. It was a vision of familial bliss, a self-sufficient paradise complete with ponds, greenhouses, and a legacy for their 18 children. The audience, captivated by this seemingly idyllic lifestyle, bought into its hook, line, and sinker. This was it, the final chapter in the Brown family's story, a permanent home where they would live out their days in plural matrimony. Behind the scenes, however, a different story was unfolding, one that would remain hidden from the public eye for years to come. The seeds of discord had been sown long before the first shovel ever threatened to break ground on Coyote Pass. The move to Flagstaff itself was a point of contention, with some of the wives expressing their reservations, their voices drowned out by Kody's unwavering determination. Christine, in particular, had been vocal about her desire to move back to Utah, a plea that fell on deaf ears. This was the first of many red flags, a clear indication that the United Front presented to the world was nothing more than a carefully constructed facade. The cracks in their foundation were already beginning to show, but the allure of the Coyote Pass dream was a powerful anesthetic, numbing the wives to the harsh reality of their situation. They sold their 4 homes in Las Vegas, pooling their resources to finance this grand new adventure, a decision that would have devastating consequences for some of them down the road. It was a gamble, a leap of faith into a future that was far from certain, a future that was being orchestrated by a man whose promises were as empty as the vast, undeveloped landscape of Coyote Pass. The on-screen narrative of unity was a masterclass in public relations, a carefully crafted performance for the benefit of the cameras and the loyal viewers who had followed their journey for years. Kody, with his charismatic pronouncements and grand visions, was the ringmaster of the circus, and the wives for a time played their parts with convincing palpability. They spoke of their excitement for the future, of their eagerness to build their new lives together on this shared piece of land. They toured the property, pointing out the spots where their future homes would stand, their children's laughter echoing through the empty landscape. It was a picture of domestic harmony, a testament to the supposed strength of their plural marriage. But even then, there were subtle hints of the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface. The disagreements over the division of the land, the subtle jabs and passive-aggressive comments, the palpable tension that hung in the air whenever the topic of building was raised. These were all signs that the dream was already beginning to crumble. The promise of Coyote Pass was a powerful one, a vision of a shared future that was so enticing it was easy to ignore the warning signs. It was a promise of stability, of permanence, of a place where they could finally put down roots and build a lasting legacy for their family. But as the months turned into years and the land remained untouched, that promise began to feel more and more like a lie. The idyllic dream of Coyote Pass, once a symbol of hope and unity, slowly but surely transformed into a source of immense stress and anxiety. The financial burden of the property, coupled with the ever-present pressure to begin building, created a toxic environment that was ripe for manipulation and control. Kody, who held the purse strings and the power, used the land as a weapon, a tool to keep his wives in line. He dangled the promise of their future homes like a carrot on a stick, a reward for their obedience and compliance. The constant delays were always someone else's fault: the wives' inability to get along, the logistical hurdles, the financial constraints. He was the victim, the long-suffering patriarch trying to hold his family together in the face of their incessant bickering and ungratefulness. It was a narrative he would stick to for years, a convenient excuse for his own inaction and a way to deflect blame from the real issue at hand: the unequal and unjust distribution of the family's assets. While Kody and Robyn lived comfortably in a large purchased home, Janelle was forced to live in an RV on the property, a stark and undeniable symbol of the growing disparity within the family. Mary, for her part, was emotionally exiled, her presence tolerated but her voice ignored. The dream of a shared paradise had become a nightmare of financial and emotional abuse, and the land, once a symbol of their unity, was now a constant reminder of their division. The deception began with the very deeds to the land, a complex and confusing web of ownership that was designed to favor one couple above all others. A deep dive into the property records reveals a startling truth. The parcels were not divided equally. Kody and Robyn, his legal wife, were on the deed for the largest and most valuable parcel, giving them a controlling interest in the property. This was a bombshell, a revelation that flew in the face of the family's on-screen narrative of shared ownership and equal partnership. The other wives, who had contributed their life savings to the purchase of the land, were relegated to smaller, less desirable plots. Their financial stake in the family's future significantly diminished. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. In a move that can only be described as predatory, Christine signed her portion of the land over to Kody and Robyn for a mere $10. A property valued at over $200,000, relinquished for the price of a fast food meal. It was a transaction that beggared belief, a clear and undeniable example of the financial manipulation that was taking place behind closed doors. The family's pooled money, it seemed, was being used to create a private kingdom for Kody and Robyn, a kingdom built on the backs of the other wives, their financial contributions, and their emotional sacrifices. The manipulation was not limited to the division of the land. It permeated every aspect of their lives, a constant and insidious presence that poisoned their relationships and eroded their trust. Kody's endless excuses for not building on Coyote Pass were a masterclass in gaslighting. He blamed the wives for their inability to get along, for their bickering and their jealousy. He painted himself as the victim, the long-suffering patriarch trying to herd a flock of unruly sheep. But the truth was far more sinister. The delays were a deliberate tactic, a way to maintain control and keep his wives in a state of perpetual uncertainty. As long as the land remained undeveloped, their futures were tied to him, their financial security dependent on his whims. Janelle, who had always been the most financially independent of the wives, was reduced to living in an RV on the property, a stark and humiliating symbol of her powerlessness. Mary, who had been with Kody since the beginning, was a ghost in her own family. Her voice silenced, her opinions disregarded. She was a constant reminder of a past that Kody was desperate to erase, a past that did not include Robyn, his one true love. The land, which was supposed to be a symbol of their unity, had become a prison, a desolate and windswept battleground where a silent war was being waged, a war for control, for power, and for the very soul of the family. The shell game being played with the family's finances was as complex as it was cruel. On the surface, it appeared that they were all in it together, a single economic unit working towards a common goal. But in reality, it was a system designed to benefit one couple at the expense of all others. The money from the sale of their Las Vegas homes, the income from their reality show, the profits from their various business ventures, it all flowed into a single pot, a pot that was controlled by Kody. He was the one who decided how the money was spent, who got what and when. And his priorities were clear. He and Robyn enjoyed a lifestyle of relative luxury, their large home filled with expensive furniture and new appliances, while the other wives were forced to scrimp and save, their financial futures hanging by a thread. Janelle, who had once been a successful real estate agent, was now living in a trailer, her life savings tied up in a piece of land she couldn't even build on. Mary, who had poured her heart and soul into the family for decades, was left to fend for herself, her emotional and financial needs completely ignored. It was a system of economic oppression, a carefully constructed trap that was designed to keep the wives dependent and compliant. The dream of Coyote Pass was the bait, a tantalizing glimpse of a future that would never be. The reality was a nightmare of financial and emotional abuse, a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The illusion of a happy, cohesive family, so carefully crafted for the cameras, was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own lies. The on-screen bickering and disagreements were no longer just for show. They were real, raw, and deeply personal. The Wissusdom, who had once been united in their shared faith and their love for Kody, were now at odds with each other, their relationship strained to the breaking point. The stress of their financial situation, coupled with Kody's increasingly erratic and tyrannical behavior, had created a toxic environment that was no longer sustainable. The dream of Coyote Pass, which had once been a symbol of their unity, was now a constant source of conflict and resentment. It was a daily reminder of their broken promises and their shattered dreams. The land, which was supposed to be their forever home, had become a desolate and windswept battleground, a place where their hopes and their happiness had gone to die. The public, who had once been so captivated by their story, was now beginning to see the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. The whispers of discontent were growing louder, the rumors of financial impropriety more persistent. The Coyote Pass conspiracy was about to be blown wide open, and the fallout would be devastating. The catalyst for the implosion of the Brown family was Christine's decision to leave. It was a move that no one saw coming, a brave and defiant act of self-preservation that sent shockwaves through the family and their millions of fans. For years, Christine had been the peacemaker, the one who always tried to keep the family together, even at the expense of her own happiness. But she had finally reached her breaking point. She was tired of the lies, the manipulation, and the emotional neglect. She was tired of sharing a husband who clearly favored one wife above all others. She was tired of living in a system that was designed to keep her down, and so she walked away. Her departure was the first domino to fall, the event that would set in motion a chain reaction of financial and emotional revelations that would ultimately expose the dark underbelly of the Brown family's polygamous lifestyle. It was the beginning of the end, the moment when the carefully constructed facade of unity and harmony finally came crashing down. Christine's decision to leave was not an easy one. She had been with Kody for over 25 years, and she had built her entire life around the principles of plural marriage. But she had come to the realization that the life she was living was no longer sustainable. She was unhappy, unfulfilled, and deeply lonely. She had tried to make it work, she had tried to be the perfect sister wife, but it was not enough. Kody's blatant favoritism towards Robyn had created a deep and irreparable rift in their relationship. Christine felt like an outsider in her own family, a third wheel in a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership of equals. The move to Flagstaff had been the final straw. She had been adamant about not wanting to leave Las Vegas, and she had pleaded with Kody to consider moving back to Utah, but her pleas had been ignored. It was a clear and painful reminder of her powerlessness in the family, a stark illustration of the fact that her wants and her needs were secondary to Kody's. And so, with a heavy heart but a clear conscience, she made the difficult decision to leave. It was a decision that would not only change the course of her own life, but would also have a profound and lasting impact on the entire Brown family. The financial awakening that followed Christine's departure was a brutal and eye-opening experience for everyone involved. As the details of her settlement began to emerge, the shocking truth of the family's financial situation was laid bare. The revelation that she had signed over her portion of Coyote Pass to Kody and Robyn for a mere $10 was a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the family and the public. It was a clear and undeniable example of the financial exploitation that had been taking place for years, a stark illustration of the fact that the family's so-called shared assets were anything but. The injustice of the situation was palpable, and it became a focal point of the ensuing conflict. How could a woman who had dedicated over 2 decades of her life to the family, who had borne 6 of Kody's children, be so callously and cruelly cheated out of her fair share of their collective wealth? It was a question that demanded an answer, and it was a question that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of the entire Kody Janelle Brown had always been portrayed as the pragmatic, level-headed one, the wife who understood business and managed the family's complex finances. She was the one who, in the early seasons, confidently declared her financial independence, her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. This image, however, was another casualty of the Kody past deception. As Christine's fight for her financial freedom played out, Janelle was forced to make a series of startling and heartbreaking admissions. In tearful confessions, she revealed that she had poured her entire life savings into the family pot, investing everything she had into the dream of Coyote Pass. And what did she have to show for it? Nothing. Not a single brick had been laid. She had no home, no security, and her entire financial future was tied up in a property that was becoming increasingly clear would never be developed. The ultimate symbol of her financial ruin was the RV she was forced to live in on the property, a cramped and undignified existence that stood in stark contrast to the spacious, comfortable home Kody and Robyn occupied just a short drive away. The so-called family accountant was, in fact, financially destitute, her independence a distant memory, her future held hostage by the whims of a patriarch who had systematically stripped her of her assets and her agency. Her testimony was a devastating blow to the myth of the shared family pot, exposing it for what it truly was: a slush fund for Kody and his favored wife. The slow-burning resentment and financial anxiety that had been simmering for years finally boiled over into a series of explosive on-camera confrontations that would become the defining moments of the show's later seasons. The idyllic facade of the Brown family was ripped away, revealing the raw, ugly truth of their dysfunctional relationships. The battle for assets became a literal battle, with screaming matches and tearful accusations replacing the once scripted scenes of family harmony. The most visceral of these confrontations was between Janelle and Kody. Pushed to her breaking point by Kody's threats to evict her adult sons from their home, Janelle finally unleashed years of pent-up frustration and rage. In a now iconic scene, she stood her ground, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury, screaming at Kody, "This is all I have!" It was a primal cry of desperation, the raw anguish of a woman who had finally realized the full extent of her financial vulnerability. She had given everything to this family, and now, in her time of need, she was being threatened with homelessness, her children's security used as a pawn in Kody's cruel game of control. This was not just an argument about money, it was a fight for her very survival, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of power in a system that was designed to leave her with nothing. The televised tell-all episodes, once a forum for lighthearted reflections and carefully curated family anecdotes, transformed into quasi-legal depositions. One by one, the original 3 wives, Christine, Janelle, and Mary, sat down and, under the glare of the studio lights, laid bare the years of financial inequity and emotional neglect they had endured. Their individual stories, once told in isolation, now wove together to form a damning and cohesive narrative of systemic abuse. They corroborated each other's accounts of financial manipulation, of being kept in the dark about the family's true financial picture, of their contributions being devalued, and their needs ignored. Mary, who had been emotionally and financially sidelined for years, finally found her voice, speaking of the loneliness and isolation she had felt, of being a member of the family in name only. Her story, combined with Christine's and Janelle's, painted a devastating portrait of a polygamous family that had devolved into a de facto monarchy, with Kody as the tyrannical king and Robyn as his chosen queen. The fantasy of a united, equal partnership was shattered forever, replaced by the grim reality of a family fractured by greed, favoritism, and a profound betrayal of trust. At the heart of this complex and predatory financial structure was a corporate entity known as Dabsark Entertainment LLC. The name itself was a chillingly prophetic acronym, representing the names of Robyn's children, Dayton, Aurora, Brianna, Kody and Robyn's shared children, Solomon and Ariella, and of course, Robyn and Kody themselves. The other 13 children, the children of the original 3 wives, were conspicuously absent. This was no accident. The formation of Debsark was a calculated legal maneuver, a way to legally bind the wives' assets together while simultaneously consolidating power and control in the hands of Kody and Robyn. All of the family's income, including the money from their television show, was funneled into this single corporate entity. This meant that even though Christine, Janelle, and Mary were equal partners in the show, their earnings were not their own. They were assets of the corporation, a corporation from which they were systematically excluded. Christine's struggle to extricate herself from this legal entanglement became a case study in the complexities of leaving a polygamous marriage. She wasn't just leaving a husband, she was divorcing a corporation. It was a long and arduous process, a legal battle that was fought behind the scenes, far from the prying eyes of the cameras. But it was a battle she was determined to win, a fight for her financial freedom and for the right to build a future that was her own, a future that was no longer controlled by the iron fist of Debsark Entertainment. The aftermath of this emotional and financial earthquake was as dramatic as the events that had preceded it. The family, once a seemingly unbreakable unit of 19, was irrevocably shattered. Christine, having successfully navigated the treacherous legal waters of her separation, emerged victorious. She sold her share of the Coyote Pass property, a share she had to fight tooth and nail to reclaim, and used the proceeds to buy a beautiful new home in Utah, close to her children and her grandchildren. It was a powerful symbol of her newfound freedom, a tangible representation of the new life she was building for herself, a life free from the toxicity and control of her former marriage. Her joy was palpable, her relief immense. She had escaped the financial prison that had been so carefully constructed around her, and in doing so she had found a level of happiness and peace that had eluded her for years. Her story became an inspiration for countless others who felt trapped in similar situations, a testament to the power of courage and the importance of fighting for one's own well-being. Inspired by Christine's courageous example, Janelle soon followed suit. Her journey to independence was a more gradual one, a slow and steady process of disentangling herself from the financial and emotional web that had ensnared her for so long. She, too, eventually secured her own independent life, moving away from the desolate landscape of Coyote Pass and creating a new home for herself, a space where she could finally be the master of her own destiny. Her departure was another devastating blow to Kody and Robyn, another nail in the coffin of their once grand vision of a polygamous dynasty. The dream of a united family living together in harmony on their shared piece of land was now nothing more than a distant, painful memory. The original 3 wives, the women who had been with Kody from the beginning, the women who had sacrificed so much for the sake of the family, were gone. They had chosen freedom over servitude, self-respect over subjugation. And in doing so, they had left Kody and Robyn to reap what they had sown. And what of Kody and Robyn, the self-proclaimed king and queen of this shattered kingdom? They were left exactly where they had always wanted to be, alone, together. But the victory was a hollow one. They were left holding the deeds to a massive, undeveloped piece of land, a property that was supposed to be the jewel in the crown of their family legacy. But the family was gone. The land, once a symbol of their dreams, was now a monument to their failures, a constant and painful reminder of the family they had destroyed. The promised land had become their financial prison. They were saddled with the debt of the property, the taxes, the upkeep, all without the financial contributions of the other wives to help shoulder the burden. The grand vision of ponds and greenhouses and a bustling family compound had been replaced by the stark reality of their isolation. They were alone on their desolate patch of dirt, surrounded by the ghosts of their broken promises and the echoes of their shattered dreams. The Coyote Pass conspiracy had reached its inevitable conclusion, a tragic and cautionary tale of how greed, manipulation, and a lust for control can poison even the strongest of bonds and turn a promised land into a barren wasteland. The final irony is that in their quest to have it all, Kody and Robyn were left with nothing but a 15-acre plot of land and the bitter taste of a dream that had turned to dust.